Greetings and salutations, and welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Installing Linux Mint 19. I'm Joe Collins, and I am going to take you through all the steps necessary to get Linux installed on your computer. This video is aimed at new users. If you are somebody who is already familiar with how Linux is installed, you might find this video tedious. But if you are a new user, I'm really glad you're here, because I'm going to take you through the process one step at a time and explain it in great detail so that you understand what is going on each step of the way. I have always said that somebody will stick with Linux if they get started with Linux the right way. And the first thing that you need to have is a good, solid install. I have been helping people around the world get started with Linux for the last several years through a project called Easy Linux. And I'm saying this for the benefit of those of you who don't necessarily follow my channel. You're brand new to the channel. And I've worked with thousands of people. So what you see in this video comes from my experience working with them. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is the computer that you're going to install Linux Mint on. And this should not be the computer that you use every day to get things done. I recommend that you find another computer to install Linux on, keep your current computer running, and play around with Linux and get confident with it. Linux Mint is super easy to use, but it is different from what you're used to if you're somebody who is coming from the Windows operating system, or even if you've used Mac. It's a very different system, and it's going to take you some time to learn your way around, so get yourself a test machine to play with. I also do not recommend setting up a dual boot. A dual boot is when you have Windows and Linux running on the same computer at the same time. If you are somebody who is very familiar with how bootloaders work, you know a lot about hard drives and the partitions on those drives, and that's something that you're very comfortable with, then maybe you can go on ahead and dual boot, because you're going to be able to fix problems when they come along. However, most folks, most novice users, they're not really into all of that, and dual boots can get them in a lot of trouble. If something goes wrong during the setup of a dual boot, you can actually end up with a system that won't boot Linux and won't boot Windows. It won't do anything. And the only thing that you can do at that point is to reload Windows and or Linux from scratch. That's all you can do. So if you're not prepared to deal with that, here's what I suggest. Go find yourself a computer that you're going to make your Linux Mint computer that you're going to learn on. And it could be an older machine that you don't use much anymore. It could be a computer that you pick up refurbished off of Craigslist or eBay or whatever the equivalents to those are in your part of the world. Any computer will do that's manufactured within the last 10 years. Pretty much all of them will run Linux. Of course, now, the more memory and the more processing power you have in your computer, the better it's going to run. But you can get away with running Linux Mint on machines with as little as 2 gigabytes of memory and a dual-core processor. It actually works quite well. And most people, when they have a machine that they have been running Windows on and they replace that with Linux, they come back and tell me that they can't believe at the performance that they're getting from the machine now that Windows is gone. So, I just wanted to make that perfectly clear up front. In this video today, we are going to assume that you are going to be installing Linux Mint on a x86 computer, not a Mac computer. Installing Linux Mint on a Mac is a different process. There's more steps to it, and I suggest that you go look that up elsewhere. We're also going to assume that the machine you're installing to has one hard drive in it, and we are going to wipe that machine and start from scratch. So this will be a 100% Linux machine. So if there's any data on the machine that you're going to be installing this on, make sure that you back that up. We'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. So the cheat sheet that you're seeing on your screen is going to be in the description to the video, and you can follow the steps there. You can copy and paste it and print it and do whatever you want with it. The first thing that we need to do is create a bootable DVD or USB media. And You do that by downloading an ISO file from linuxmint.com. So let's take a look at how that works. We'll jump over here and go to download on the Linux Mint page, and you see that right now it's Linux Mint 19 Tera. Now, as this Linux Mint version grows, you're going to see Linux Mint 19.1, 19.2, 19.3 in the years to come. This is still probably going to apply to later dot releases of Linux Mint 19. Just keep that in mind. If it doesn't, I will post a change. I have done that so far with Linux Mint 18, and it's worked out quite well. So be sure and subscribe to the channel. If anything changes, I will let you know. So you just scroll down here, and you've got some choices to make. First of all, you have to choose your desktop. It can be Cinnamon, Mate. I know that's spelled mate, but we say it Mate. And then there's XFCE. Cinnamon is the desktop that's pretty much standard with Linux Mint. It is a desktop that they maintain themselves, and I find it to be the easiest for folks who are coming from Windows 7, Windows 8, and Windows type environment to kind of slide into. It's very familiar. It uses the same sort of start menu layout as Microsoft systems. The XFCE and Mate desktops, they're good for low resource hardware, but Cinnamon will run okay on anything that has any accelerated graphics and like 256 megabytes of video memory on the graphics card. So you're pretty safe to choose Cinnamon. The next thing you got to figure out is whether you're going to want to get 32-bit or 64-bit. 32-bit is for machines that have a 32-bit processor in the CPU, and at this point in time, those are some pretty old machines. So unless you're trying to install Linux Mint on a really old computer and you know for sure that you have a 32-bit processor, choose 64-bit. There is absolutely no advantage whatsoever in trying to install a 32-bit operating system on a 64-bit computer. The conventional wisdom 5 or 10 years ago was that in some cases that would be a more stable way to go. That is not true today. If you have a 64-bit chip, you need the 64-bit system. So just double click on that. Actually, just a single click will take you here to where you can download that, and you have some options up here as well. One that you might want to take note of here is how to verify your ISO. If you, for any reason, are unsure of that ISO and you want to make sure that there's no malware, nothing's changed, or it didn't get garbled when it was coming over the internet, you can follow the directions there to do that. Most of the time, there's no problem whatsoever. Many years ago, there was a breach of the Linux Mint repositories, and a couple of their ISO images got replaced with some malware. That has been addressed years ago. You don't have to worry about now that now it's all pretty clean. So a close mirror to me would be James Madison University. That's about 250 miles away. So I can choose that one, and then it will start downloading. You see it's downloading here now. Of course, I don't need this to download because I already have this, but I did want to show you how the process worked. These are big files. They take a long time to download. Do keep that in mind as well. So let's jump back over here. First of all, let's put our web page back so we have a nice background. And we'll go ahead and close the download thing. We'll go back to our sheet here and see where we're at. So we've downloaded our image, and then we need to create that bootable DVD or USB. If you have Windows 7 and up, you can simply insert a blank DVD and double-click the ISO file where it's downloaded to, and the system will open up a window, and it will take you through the process of burning a bootable DVD. A USB drive will require you to install software, and I have a link to how that is done from the linuxmintguide.org, and you can check that out if you want to learn how to do that. I'm not going to show you how to do it in the video because it's going to depend on what machine you have, what software you have downloaded, and all that kind of stuff. So once you have that, What you might need to do with your computer is turn off secure boot in your computer's BIOS setting. If it will not boot and you're getting a blank screen or an error message, this may be your problem. This is also something that I cannot show you because every computer manufacturer does it differently. Secure boot is something that has been added to many newer computers. We're talking maybe 3 to 5 years old, and sometimes that will block the system from booting off of anything other than the installed operating system. So you might need to go in there and turn that off. Another thing that you might have a problem with is UEFI, and you may want to take your system and roll it back to the old master boot record way of booting up. That is only if you have a problem. Linux Mint works fine with UEFI, and the way I'm going to show you how to set it up today, it should just detect that and it will write that UEFI special boot partition and it will rock on and keep going. But if for some reason you continually have a problem, you can't get it installed, you might want to roll that back as well. So once you get Linux Mint 19 booted, you got to take some time to play around with it and see if your hardware is working properly. We're going to walk through that process here using a virtual machine today. It is easier to show you guys how this is done in a virtual machine than to try and do it on real hardware. Some people say, well, if you're doing it on a virtual machine, it's not going to be the same. The way I'm showing you, it's going to be exactly the same. So let's go ahead and boot up our machine, and I've got it set up and ready to go. So this is just like you booted up your computer, and you're going to see a screen that looks something like that. So we can go ahead and just press enter there and press enter again, and it will go ahead and install Linux Mint, or you can wait for that little timer to time out. Whatever works best for you. Do keep in mind that when you are booting from the bootable media, that's going to take a while to load. It's in this file system called Squash FS, which everything is compressed, and it just takes a long time to read. And especially if you're using a DVD to boot your system, DVDs take a while to get loaded up when they boot. So don't be surprised if you have enough time to go fix a cup of coffee between the time you start and the time it actually gets booted up. It's perfectly normal, just let it go. And if your computer should lock up, hold down the power button for 5 seconds and try it again. Sometimes it doesn't work the first time around. Don't be freaked out about that. If you get this message here that says that you're running in software rendering mode, that just means that you do not have 3D accelerated graphics drivers that are necessary to display the desktop without using software to draw everything you see. So the way it should work is that should be passed on to your graphics card, and that should be drawing things, and the system shouldn't have to do it. Running Cinnamon in software rendering mode all the time is not the world's greatest idea. So what I'm going to do is make this easy for everybody to see, okay? So I want to change the font size, so I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. I'm going to put in fonts, and I'm going to choose the second one there. And I'm going to make that, we're going to make it really big, like make it easier for everybody to see. And also what I'm going to do is jump into the themes here in system settings. Like I said, I know I'm jumping ahead, and I'm going to put it on the dark theme. I like dark themes. I think they're easier to see. So I'm going to go ahead and just set everything to Mint Y dark. Now you can put that on whatever you want to. No big deal at all. I just like this, and a lot of people tell me that it's easier to see in videos, so we're going to go that way with it. And if you want to make that go away, just click in the middle of that. So while you're here, as I said earlier, play around, make sure your hardware works, make sure that you can hook up your internet if you have Wi-Fi on a laptop. If the drivers are working right out of the box, then you should be able to hook up. Now, if they don't panic. What it may be is that you need to install a proprietary driver once the system is installed. And if you are in that situation, hook up an Ethernet cable to your laptop, and then you can install the system. And once it's installed, you can install the drivers. That's coming up later in the video. I'll show you where and how that's done. Every once in a great while, you will end up with a situation with Linux Mint or any Linux where you have a particular Wi-Fi card in a laptop that it just doesn't work with. And in those situations, the best way to fix that problem is actually just to buy one of those little USB Wi-Fi dongles that does work with Linux and plug it into the machine. I have found that no amount of downloading source code and trying to compile drivers works. And since we are talking about Linux 19, which is Linux Mint 19, which has just been out for a couple of days as of the recording of this video, there is no guarantee that any of that would work. So don't even bother with it. Don't beat your head against a wall. Just get you a little dongle that will work. But these days, honestly, most of the time, it just works and no driver needs to be installed. That's the vast majority of installs that I've worked with. So once you're pretty sure that everything's good to go and you want to go ahead and install, what you want to do is make sure that you go ahead and back up any data that you want on your Windows machine. Okay, I even put that in here. There is no way to uninstall Linux once it's installed. You can't go back to Windows. It's going to wipe out the hard drive. Do not use commercial backup software or the built-in Windows backup utility. Your files must be stored in an open format that Linux can read. Linux will happily read NTFS, FAT32, any file system, but you can't have your files in some proprietary format. You can put them in a zip file. Linux can read that with the archive manager, so you can get your stuff out of it. So if there's anything on that computer you want to keep, you want to put it on a USB stick, external hard drive, burn it to DVDs if you want to go old school, whatever, just make sure that you have it off the machine, because installing Linux will wipe the drive completely off. It's also a good idea to have another computer, smartphone, or tablet available so you can have access to the internet in case you need to look something up while you're doing that. We've already talked about turning off secure boot. We have talked about hooking your computer up to the internet with an Ethernet cable if drivers will be needed for Wi-Fi. Boot Linux Mint. Launch Linux Mint's installer and follow the directions. Restart the computer, and you are now running Linux Mint. So let's see what that looks like. Let me go back to that. I'd like to have that back up, please. Thank you very much. I wanted to do this. None of these go perfect, gang. It's all right. If it was perfect, they'd have to pay me a lot more. You know what I mean? So let's go ahead and open up the installer. And we're going to install Linux Mint. The first thing that you need to do is choose your language. We speak English around here, so that's perfectly all right. Then you choose the keyboard. I have a US keyboard that has 102 keys on it or whatever. That's perfectly all right. Now this is a box you want to make sure that you have checked. This installs a third-party software. Checks would be nice, like Chex Mix or Chex Cereal. I like that too. But you want the box checked. That's what I was trying to say. This will make sure that those codecs get installed right up front. And then we'll go to the next option here. Now when you get to this point and you click on this, this is going to kind of sit here and crunch for quite some time. What it is doing at this point is it's checking out your system. It's making sure that it can read all your hardware. It's looking at the hard drives that are installed. It's looking at everything. And it's going to get you ready for this screen right here, which gives you a whole bunch of options. The one that we're going to choose is Erase Disk and Install Linux Mint. You have some other options here. If you were going to do a manual partition of the drive, then you would choose something else. We're going to erase and install, so we're starting from scratch. It's the least, it's actually the safest and most reliable way to go. Now it will tell you that it's going to create one large partition on the drive. Those of you who remember the Linux Mint 18 version of this video will recall that it also created a swap space. We don't do that anymore. Linux Mint 19 is based on Ubuntu 18.04, and it will create a swap file that the system will manage. So we don't have to worry about swap partitions on our drives with the latest Linux Mint. Now choose your time zone. East Coast is fine with me. You can choose your time zone or type in the name of a city to get yours the way you want it to be. Put your name in. Put your whole name in. And then as far as the name of the machine is concerned, I'm just going to be real creative and call it LM19VM. You can choose whatever you like. It'll tell you if you have any characters that won't work. For your username, you can stick with what it chooses. In this case, it's going to call me Joe, which is perfectly all right with me. That has to be all lowercase, and it can be numbers and letters, but no spaces. So I could put in there Joe C, Joe 1, that sort of thing. You get the idea. Choose a password that is short, but one that you will be able to remember easily. And the reason why you want to do that is because you're going to type it a lot when you're working with Linux. So really long, elaborate passwords, they're not necessary. Try and come up with something really unique, a combination of numbers and letters that's not a real word. Those are difficult for people to figure out. But like I said, make it one that you'll remember and make it one that you don't mind typing a lot. So you can also choose here to have Linux Mint log you in automatically. I usually do not select that, especially for laptops. I like the system to prompt me for a password to log in, and if you're going to be creating accounts for other users on the same machine, you probably want to have that set up front as well. But that's your choice, and you can do that if you like. I just don't usually recommend it. For me, it's like if somebody actually gets a hold of the machine, I don't want to make it super easy for them to get in and look at your stuff. You know what I mean? So this installation process can take anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour and a half. It depends on your hardware, and it depends on the speed of your internet connection, because it does download some things from the internet as it goes along. What we're going to do in the video here is just going to pause it, and we're going to let it finish what it needs to do, and we'll pick up when it's time for us to do something. The installation is complete, and this box popped up on the screen. You can either continue testing or you can restart now. We're going to go ahead and restart now. Always the most exciting part of installing any operating system is the first boot. And you should get a message that looks like that. This is when you will remove your DVD. It should automatically eject. Or your USB stick. Go ahead and pull anything that is plugged into the computer out, or remove your DVD. Press enter, and the machine will boot for the first time into Linux Mint proper. If for some reason you go through this process and it does not boot properly, or it seems to hang up during the process, don't be afraid to go ahead and try it again. There's a lot of stuff that happens during these installations, and if something goes goofy, sometimes it doesn't work the first time around. Don't be afraid just to start over and do it again. Usually the second time around it'll work, but sometimes it takes like 3 tries at it. And after that, if it doesn't work, then you know, hey, there's a problem here and something you're going to need to address. So here's our login screen. Put your password in, and then we can jump in. Now we get into the part of the video where we're going to be configuring Linux Mint. And the first time that it starts the desktop, it may stay dark like it is now for a little while. And the reason why it's going to do that is because it's setting everything up in the background, and then we get the welcome screen that pops up. Let me go ahead and click that to make that message go away. And once again, I'm going to jump into the settings. We're going to jump ahead a little bit and adjust the fonts and change the theme. So let me go ahead and get that going. Let's make everything exceptionally large. It makes it easier for you to see and me to see as well. So 1.4 should be enough for our font scaling. Let's go ahead and back that up, and I want to jump over here into themes. And we'll put that dark theme back on. Mint Y Dark is definitely my favorite theme for Linux Mint. There you go. So we'll probably end up jumping back in there for some other things later on in the video. I'm going to kind of show you some tips and tricks and things. So what is really cool with Linux Mint 19 is now that in the welcome screen we have this lovely first steps section. And they kind of take you through the process of what you need to do right after you install Linux Mint. So the first thing that they want you to do is to set up system snapshots using Timeshift. This will allow you to roll your system back to a former state. This is like System Restore in Windows. And it uses a program called Timeshift to do this. So what we're going to do is go ahead and set that up. So if we did the regular install, we got ext4 for a file system. We're not using Btrfs, so we don't have to worry about that. So just choose next here. And now what it's going to do is it's going to analyze the hard drive on the system, see how much space there is. If you have more than one drive set up or more than one partition on that drive, it's looking to see what that's all about. So this takes it a couple of seconds to go ahead and just kind of go through and check all that out. And the only place that we can put our snapshots is on the main drive, because that's all we've got is that one partition, and that will be perfectly fine. So go ahead and click next. And then what I like to do here is set this to do what is called an M+1 backup. So that is 2 monthlies, and it'll be 3 weekly snapshots, and then 5 daily snapshots. And before you start freaking out going, oh my god, that's going to take up a whole bunch of disk space, Timeshift doesn't work that way. What Timeshift does is it creates a link farm. It takes one snapshot and then it only saves the changes after that. So you can have 10 snapshots, but in reality it doesn't take up nearly the space that 10 snapshots would take up on your hard drive. So let's move forward. And then we're done. It's telling you a little bit how it works. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a snapshot, and we're going to do an on-demand snapshot. And it's going to go ahead and take care of that. And then we're going to tag that and call it fresh install. That way, if it at any point as we're playing around with Linux Mint, we want to roll back to our original setup, like right after we installed it, we can do that. So we'll pause the video while that is taking place. It does take it a little while to get set up. Timeshift has taken its first snapshot, and we're going to add a comment to this just by clicking here, and I'm going to call it fresh install. This software is called Timeshift. It is up and running, and if you want to go back to it later to see what it's doing, then you can find it in the menu just by opening the menu like this and then typing in Timeshift. For those of you who want to create separate home and root partitions, in the past I have recommended 25 gigabytes for your root partition, but now that Timeshift is here, if you're going to be using that root partition to store snapshots, which is one of the ways that you can do it, you're going to obviously want to make that bigger. Somebody pointed that out. 50 gigabytes should be enough, or you can put it in your home partition. Whatever you want to do is fine with me. And then you can keep an eye on Timeshift, like I said, by opening it up in the menu. And you must have administrator privileges to manage Timeshift. Now that we have that set up and we have a way to get the system back up and running should we mess something up, I'm going to go ahead and they have it in the order here that you should do your drivers next. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is go ahead and update the system. I think it's better to install drivers after you run the first updates. It just makes more sense to me. Now, we no longer choose security levels with Linux Mint. It used to be that this little screen would open up Linux Mint 18 and you would have to choose what security level you wanted. Now everybody gets the same security level, which is it updates everything. So I think that's actually a good thing. So just click OK here. And then this is going to go out and it's going to look for updates to your system. But before we get to that, we want to set the mirrors for our system. Now, what are mirrors? They are different servers around the world that keep a copy of the Linux Mint and Ubuntu files, and you want to choose servers that are close to you or fast, whichever one comes first. And one of the nicest things that Linux Mint does is provide this software sources tool. So when you get here, just click on your mirrors for Linux Mint, and it's going to go out and it's going to find the fastest local mirrors for you. So in this case, it's recommending Clarkson University there, or I can go with EvoWise CDN. I think I'll just go with that one. Go ahead and apply that. It really doesn't matter which one you choose as long as it's a mirror that's up and running and works. And you do the same thing for the Ubuntu base of the system, and it will go through and it's going to find different mirrors, the ones that are closest and fastest to you. This is going to take a while. There's a lot of mirrors on this list for Ubuntu. We're just going to choose, whatever pops up just to keep things going pretty quick here. So, there you go, EvoWise. So we have the mirrors are the same. And I've done videos on this. If you're new to the channel and you've never seen it before, there's a lot of documentation about how mirrors work, and I've talked about it as well. So once you have chosen the mirrors, the next thing it's going to say is you need to go ahead and update everything. And so that's going to do that right now. You can click on details and watch this process take place, and it's just going to go out and it's going to check the mirrors. This could take it a few minutes to do. And every now and again you may get a warning that your mirrors are out of date or that you need to change your mirrors. So it will just pop up with your update manager when that comes along. So this can take a few moments for it to do. Let's pause the video. Alright, that's complete. So the next thing that we can do here is to go ahead and install our updates. I'm going to hit refresh again just to make sure that everything listed is what it should be. And now we will install the updates. While it is installing, do not mess with the computer at all. Because if it is updating parts of the desktop itself might become unstable. So just go ahead and install the updates. You can watch it work and then walk away. It is not unusual for it to tell you that it's going to install extra stuff, which is exactly what it's going to do here. And the further down the road we are from the initial install, or rather the initial release of Linux Mint 19, which just happened a couple of days ago as of the time of recording this video, the more updates it's going to install the first time around. So just keep that in mind. So if you're installing Linux Mint 19 and it's a year from now, for whatever reason you don't want to install 19.1 or 19.2, keep in mind there's going to be a lot of updates that come down. So this says it's going to take 7 minutes to download the updates, and then it will take some time to actually install the updates as well. This process can take anywhere from just a few minutes to an hour. Once again, it depends on the speed of your hardware, the number of updates, and the speed of your internet connection. So it just takes a little while. Just be patient. Take your time. But it's a very important thing to do. Install the updates to the system before you do anything else to it. It really makes a big difference on what kind of experience you're going to have when you start using the system. While the updates are installing, you can watch the progress of the files downloading by clicking on details here. And you can see that it's going to bring in a lot of individual files. Don't be alarmed. That's kind of the way Linux Mint works. No big deal there. Almost finished downloading the files at this point, and it's getting ready to actually start installing the updates. And one of the really cool things about that is that as it's doing that, you can watch it do its work. Just click on details when this little window pops up, and it's a little show. I remember when I first started out with Linux, I used to love to watch this, and I had no idea what it was talking about. Now I know a lot more about what it's talking about as it installs updates, but to be honest with you, not everything. That is just about finished with the updates, and then we can move on to looking at some cool features here in the Update Manager I want to show you guys. simply because of the fact that with Linux Mint 18, a lot of folks were contacting me saying, how do I manage my Linux kernel? So I want to show you that real quick before we move on to something else while we're here. Especially if you have installed this on a system with UEFI enabled, what you might end up with is a situation where all of a sudden, whenever you do an update like this, the system comes back and it says it doesn't have any room to install a new kernel. Disk space is low, but then you go back and look at your actual disk space and you say, it's not that low. Why is this thing doing that? It's simply because your little UEFI boot partition is full of kernels. So to get rid of those, go to View, and then we go to Linux Kernels. And this will open up the Linux Mint kernel tool, which is really cool. You can opt not to see this message. And you notice that we have one that is active. That's the one we're running off right now. And one that is just installed. That came in with our update. And once we get a whole bunch of these in here, you're going to want to remove the older kernels. It's a good idea to hang on to 2 versions of the kernel. One that is the most current, of course, and the one back from that. And that way, if for some reason you have to manually tell the system, no, boot on the older kernel, you can do that. But any more than that, it's just going to take up a bunch of space and cause you problems. So now the very next thing that you should do is reboot the system. And in my notes, I only have this said once, but really honestly, you need to reboot after you install a whole bunch of updates like that so they'll take effect. I'm not going to do it just to save time in the video. We're going to move on to the next step here, which is to look at how the driver manager works. So the driver manager in Linux Mint will go and look for third-party drivers. These could be drivers for your Wi-Fi. This could be drivers for your video card. It's very important that you get those installed. You could have drivers in there for your touchpad. There's all kinds of drivers that could pop up. Since this is a virtual machine, it's going to recommend that we install drivers for the virtual machine. I'm not going to do that in this video simply because it takes up time and I have shown it before. But I will tell you that do not install these drivers from the driver manager if you are running a virtual machine. What I suggest for VirtualBox is that you go to the device menu and you insert the guest additions CD image, and it will appear to the operating system to be like a CD, and then you can choose run when it pops up, and then you'll get a manual installer that will install the drivers that go along with the installed version of VirtualBox that you're using. I'm not going to do that, but you get the idea. Okay, so we have our drivers installed. Go ahead and restart the computer at this point, and then you can start putting software in. To restart the computer, just in case you don't know, right there, and then choose Restart. So the next thing that they talk about is system settings, and I'm going to show you a couple in here in just a moment or two, but there are a couple of tweaks that I want to show you, and this will help your system to perform better and make installing software a tiny bit easier. So the first thing that I want to show you how to do is to enable write caching on your drives in your computer using GNOME disks. The documentation on this, that's not what I wanted. Let me go back again. Must have typed the wrong thing. VirtualBox has crashed and I have lost control of the keyboard. This is a bug in VirtualBox, ladies and gentlemen. Please hang with me while I take this out of full screen mode. There we go. Now I should have that. There we go. Now I got the right thing, disks. So what you can do is open up disks, choose your hard drive over here. If you have more than one, you'll see both of them. And for your internal drive, go to Drive Settings, and then choose write cache and enable that. And even if you have a solid state drive, do that. Now, what that does is it makes sure that you are using write behind caching. If the drive is busy reading and it has to write at the same time, it will hang on to whatever you want to write to the drive in memory for just a little while, and as soon as the computer becomes idle, it will write that. It can really increase the performance of a system. Now, as I started to say, the documentation on exactly what's going on here is a bit sketchy. Some folks indicate that this is already turned on and you don't actually have to do this, but you will want to do that if you ever want to take manual control over it. Now, when you have write caching enabled on a drive, sometimes that can result in data loss. If that does not get written to the drive before the machine is shut down, let's say a desktop, the power goes out, then you do run a slight risk of losing some data or corrupting a file. I personally have never come across that. If you are running a laptop with a battery or a desktop with a UPS, it will never happen. But even in situations where you have a really hard crash, I've never had an issue like that on Linux Mint or any other system that I have enabled it. So I always like to point that out. And yes, for those of you who follow the channel, when I did the video the other day where I installed Ubuntu, I forgot to show you that. Sure did. Didn't include it. So it's a half dozen of one, 6 of the other, actually, whether you want to do that or not. If you want to gain control of that feature, like I said, it might already be switched on and up and running. That way it'll give you manual control, so it's a good thing to set up. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to open up Synaptic Package Manager here. And Synaptic Package Manager has a setting that for some reason or another the Linux Mint developers ship turned off that really ought to be turned on. And no, we don't want to see that again. So you go to Settings, and then we go to Preferences, and the setting that I'm talking about is right here. And for those of you looking on very small screens and you can't really make these fonts out, my apologies. It says Considered Recommended Packages as Dependencies. You definitely want to turn that on. And what that's going to do is when you install a piece of software to the system, the developer of that software can list certain other programs as recommended to go along with it. And so you may end up installing a piece of software and you find out that a feature doesn't work, or there's a button on there that is not showing up, and that's because it depends on this other program, and Linux Mint did not install it because it's not on the list of absolute dependencies, programs that the program you're trying to install, the ones that it really need other programs and other libraries it needs to run, those are called dependencies. Well, the recommended software, that's just like extra icing on the cake. And some developers, they're not real clear about what is an absolute dependency and what is recommended. So it's better to just go ahead and install all of it, and then you don't have any problems and you're not installing software that you go, why isn't this working? It's half of the features are gone. A good for instance to that was a couple of word processors out there that are in the repositories. You install them and there's no spell check and there's nothing going on, and you're like, what's wrong? And that's why. So we can go ahead and check that. So let's look at configuring the system for a little bit. We'll just take a dance through some of the different things that I usually hit on when I jump in here. So the first thing that we'll look at here is date and time. I've already showed you theming, and I am not somebody who likes a 24-hour clock. So you can make that an AM PM clock by simply turning that off. And then we'll go back here and let's see what else have we got here. Let's look at the screensaver real fast. That is usually set up to come on. What I like to do in Linux Mint, this is just my personal preference, but I'm just showing you, is I turn the screensaver off. I tell it never come on. And the only time that I want it to kick in is after the computer goes to sleep. So when it wakes up from being put to sleep, then it will have a screensaver when it comes up, and then you can put your name in there. Startup applications, I think that's actually on my list. These are things that you can turn off so they won't show up again. Like for instance, if you don't want the welcome screen, There's the Mint Welcome. Just turn that off. Mint Update is definitely something you want. Flatpak is something you want. The rest of it is pretty much stuff that you need. If you don't have NVIDIA, for instance, you can turn that off so that doesn't show up. That's just your startup applications. And yes, you can add things for the desktop to start up there. Another thing that we'll look at here is power management. And with power management, you can have it blank the screen after 30 minutes, which is usually the way I set it up. It's set to never auto suspend, but I would usually set that for like an hour. In a virtual machine, we're just going to leave that alone and leave it to never. We can configure a firewall, so let's go ahead and do that while we're here. And it takes it a second to get booted up. And we're just going to do a really simple configuration. We'll leave it set on home. We'll activate it. And now essentially what that is going to do is anything that's trying to get into our computer that is not pre-authorized in the rules, it can't do it. Now that doesn't apply to things where you click on something on a website and you want it to come in. We're talking about like if you have servers running on the computer. So if later on you decide that you want to set up SSH on your computer, which I hope you do, then you're going to want to create a rule for that. So let's go ahead and click that and then SSH. And it just warns us that, hey, we're opening up a port here, might cause a problem. We can go ahead and add that. Also, if your printer is going to be if your computer is going to be sharing a printer over the internet, then there's something in there called cups. So let me make sure I got that in there correctly. Yep, cups pops right up. So we want to add that. So now we have rules in place for SSH and cups, and with the dark theme here it's a little bit difficult to see, but you get the idea. The rules are there, and so any other traffic that's trying to get into the computer will be blocked. And with Linux, you have to pretty much manually set up those rules. Great to have that set up for a laptop that you have that you're going to be carrying into like coffee shops or public Wi-Fi anywhere. That will keep people out of your system. So that is pretty much it, gang. This is an enabled system. One thing I do want to show you, because people have asked in the past, so I'll show you at the end, is how I get my panel to be bigger. So the first thing that I like to have is a panel that will intelligently hide. And then I set a time for that. So let's see, it takes the show delay, that's when you move your cursor over it. I usually set that to 250 milliseconds, which is a quarter of a second. And how long it stays up, I want it to be about a half a second, so I put that on 500. And then I can make the panel larger here. So now we have a nice panel down there. So have fun with it. You can poke around, you can play with it. You are now have a completely up and running Linux Mint. We'll just take a real quick look at the steps here. So I've showed you how to open up GNOME disks and enable write cache for all internal drives, enable recommended packages in Synaptic Package Manager, configure the desktop, and choose startup applications. I showed you that. Oh, let's install Google Chrome. You want to install Google Chrome? I'll show you how to do it. It's all point and click and it's easy. A lot of people ask about how do I get Google Chrome up and running when I am on the system. Because if we go into the software here, I did want to show you that very quickly. No, that's not what I didn't want. Settings. I wanted software, which is right there. Thank you very much. Okay, it's going to take it just a second to get itself together. You're going to notice that even though there are thousands, literally thousands of applications here available for free, one of them is not Google Chrome. As a matter of fact, there's not Google anything. So to get that, you have to download it. I'm going to show you how to do that. One of the very few exceptions to the rule of, stay away from downloading software on your system. With Linux, look in the official repositories first, that software application or Synaptic Package Manager for the software that you need to install. If you need something outside of what comes with the distribution, then you do that first. the last thing that you want to do is download anything. And if you do download something, you want to make sure it comes from a very well-trusted source. Of course, that is outside of the realm of this particular video, but you get the idea. So let's just click on Google Chrome, and we'll go to the Google page. It says Google Chrome browser. Want to download Chrome, and it is going to open up this box, and it's going to suggest that we download the 64-bit deb package for Debian and Ubuntu. That is what works with Linux Mint as well. We do not need the RPM package for Fedora and OpenSUSE. Now, there is not a 32-bit version of Google Chrome. As I mentioned in the early part of the video, 32-bit support is going away, and you should only use that if you absolutely have to. In that case, there's another choice, and that is you can install the Chromium browser, and you can find that in the software repositories. Just do a search for Chromium web browser, and it will pop up. And it's the open source version of Chrome. It doesn't have every feature that comes with regular Google Chrome, but most of them are there. The internet is taking a couple of seconds to download, so I'm going to go ahead and pause. When we get the file here, I'll show you what to do. It's just about here now. So once that shows up all the way, just a few more seconds on the download. Of course, the quickest way to make sure that my internet's going to run slow is for me to do a video and have to show anything downloading while the video is running. So once you get it here, we'll go ahead and close Firefox, because we don't need that no mo. We can close that as well. And we're going to open Home. And we are going to go to Downloads, which is where that file went, and double click on it. And it will open with GDebi. Now, Firefox will offer to open it automatically with GDebi. I don't like to do that. And the reason why is that if something goes wrong, God knows where Firefox puts that file. I like to know where my file is, and I want to keep it for later so we can put it in downloads. So it checked it out and made sure that it could actually do it. If there was a problem, there was an error, it would let you know. So I have clicked install. It's going to ask for my password. And I'll go ahead and full screen this back up. I've been recently had a little problem with the VirtualBox where it's in full screen like this. Sometimes the keyboard stops working. I don't think I'll need to type anything else, so we can leave that open. Full screened. All right, so Google Chrome has been installed. Give it a second to get itself together, and you'll see reinstall package pop up there. That means it is there. We can go ahead and close that. We can close that as well. You can delete that file if you want to. And then all you got to do is find it in the menu. There you go, Google Chrome. You want to add that to the favorites list, add to favorites. Or just drag it over here. One of the two. We'll do the same thing. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Google Chrome is installed. And then if you want to run that and set it up, I'll show you the initial on that. The initialization process. It takes a long time to boot for the first time. I don't know why. This is something that's happening with Google Chrome lately, is that when you first install it, you click on it, and even on a really fast machine with a lot of memory, I don't know what it's doing in the background, but it does take it quite some time to open up. So we'll just wait patiently for that as we wind down the video. I think I have pretty much covered everything. Yeah, there you go. Just restart and have fun once you get things set up. And there it is. It popped right up. So you can make Google Chrome your default browser if you want to. You can automatically send messages back to Google anonymously telling them what you're doing so that they can make Chrome better. That's up to you. I usually don't check that box. And there you go. And if you have a Google account, you can sign in here, and I'm not going to show you that part. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. You have a fully functional Linux Mint. Have fun, play with it. You can't break it. I could probably sit here and go on and show you tips and tricks for another half hour, but I'm sure this video is now quite long, so I'm not going to do that. Have fun, discover it, play with it. It is a wonderful Linux distribution, and if it's your first time using Linux, glad to have you here. Well, that was fun. I guess we'll do another video like this when Linux Mint 20 comes along in a couple of years. Your feedback is always welcome. Give Easy Linux a like on Facebook if you're a Facebook user. Also, check out easylinux.com. That's sort of the central clearinghouse for the entire Easy Linux project. Lots of great stuff there. Also, check out freedompenguin.com for more about Linux. Matt Hartley over at Freedom Penguin is kind enough to syndicate the content from Easy Linux and that of a lot of other people as well. And so it's a really nice place for a lot of practical information about Linux. You can check that out if you would please. We will do it again soon. Thank you for watching.